William James, who was impressed by Peirce and who supported him financially, William James came along with what he called the pragmatic theory of truth. That is, the truth is what works. Peirce didn't agree with James. Peirce thought pragmatism is really a theory about meaning, not a theory about truth. Truth is objective for Peirce. Truth has nothing to do with whether it's useful for us or not. Is it useful to believe in God or isn't it? Well, that doesn't matter, says Peirce. But the meaning of belief in God can be tested pragmatically. But the truth of whether God exists cannot be treated pragmatically. It has to be treated experimentally. So Peirce and James differed with that. Peirce repudiated the pragmatic theory of truth. To him, the truth is objective, independent of our thoughts or aspirations. He redefined his own position as pragmaticism. He says, okay, if James is going to hijack the word pragmatism, he says, I will describe my own position by the word pragmaticism, and he says that term is ugly enough to keep it from kidnappers. Well, there are other kind of interesting things that Peirce developed. One is called phenomenology, and the term phenomenology later was used for a whole school of thought, which we'll talk about eventually. Peirce says phenomenology is the examination of the phenomena of experience. That is, what does experience display to us? Remember how Kant used the term phenomena. What are the appearances of things? And for Peirce, there are three categories here: firstness, secondness, and thirdness. All right, first would be the qualities like color, shape, and so on. Secondly, the brute facticity of something. Now, in traditional philosophy, qualities attach to substances, all right? The tree is green, and the tree is hard, and the tree is large. Those qualities, though, are qualities of the tree. The tree is the substance. The tree is the reality. The tree is the fact. In Greek thought, this is the difference between forms and matter. The forms are the qualities. The matter is what the forms attach to, or more accurately, perhaps the substance, which is both form and matter. The substance is what the forms attach to. But Peirce reproduces these discussions. Firstness is essentially form, secondness is essentially matter or substance, and then thirdness are the laws of nature, all right? And I've kind of identified these in my outline as firstness being existential, secondness being situational, and thirdness being normative. But these are kind of similar to the universals and the particulars of the Greeks. Well, these are all very interesting, and Peirce anticipates a lot to come in William James's pragmatism, but also in phenomenology, and there's a lot here, a lot of Wittgenstein here. Wittgenstein later was to say, don't engage in theoretical doubts, only engage in real doubts. That's Wittgenstein, and he holds the same view as Peirce. I don't know if he read Peirce or not. So Peirce kind of leads the way to a lot of developments. And Peirce is perhaps the most important mind in 20th century American philosophy. Now, Americans have not been known as philosophers. There is Jonathan Edwards, which I certainly should be including in this course, but I don't know quite how to do him. I mean, he's partly just an Orthodox Calvinist, and he's partly there are a few things in Edwards that are a little bit strange and weird, and I don't know quite how to. I don't want to spend class time on the weirdnesses, and I don't want to spend class time just telling you how orthodox Edwards was, so I don't know how to work him into this particular course. But anyway, Peirce is somebody who is engaged in the history of philosophy. He does have disciples, and he does introduce new ideas that are taken seriously by later generations. And so he begins a tradition of American philosophy. Wouldn't you guess that the first main school of American philosophy is pragmatism? This is what Americans are supposedly known for. We care about what works, right? We care about we care about the results of things, right? We don't think too much about the principles or the morality or the philosophy. We care about the product. In that sense, Peirce is quintessentially American, although James is even more so. I mean, Peirce had a pragmatic view of meaning. James now has a pragmatic view of truth. Well, here's William James at the bottom of 87, Roman numeral 3. He has a medical degree from Harvard, and he taught anatomy there and physiology for a while. Then he entered into the rather new science of psychology, and from there he went on to philosophy. His main work of psychology is a volume called The Varieties of Religious Experience, where he made a study of a lot of people who thought they had experience of God, and he goes through all these cases and talks about what they have in common and how they're different, and what they suppose, and is there a concept of God that might explain all these religious experiences, and he comes to the conclusion that it's kind of a finite God, that's all you need to have. But that's an example of his work in psychology. He became eventually more famous as a philosopher. William James is the brother of the novelist Henry James. William was very clear writer. People sometimes said it would have been better if William had wrote the novels and if Henry had been the philosopher, but that was not to be. I'm sure that Henry was a more subtle mind and more appropriate for him to write novels than for William. But William is, if you find Henry leading you into a swamp and you'd like a refreshment from that, go and read some of William James. But anyway, William there's some interesting things about him. Epistemology, he points out that emotions and will are important in gaining knowledge. Knowledge is not just a matter of the intellect as an abstraction. He's a radical empiricist, that is to say, everything that we know is experience, whether it comes from outside us or within us. Pragmatism. Now, James does accept the truth, the idea of truth, in the conventional sense, as something that is objective, something that is the truth no matter what we think about it. But James is concerned about the way how can we identify truth given our fallibility. And he says that the ideas that we consider to be true, the ideas that we identify as truth, when we say, yeah, I know that's the truth, these are the ideas that work. These are the ideas that lead somewhere. These are the ideas that don't mislead us. And we can count on them. And so they have cash value. You see, he uses all these terms to indicate something that is pragmatically useful. True ideas are ideas that succeed. And so they're getting to know the truth is a process. Truth is not something stagnant. It's not something static. It's not that you have these pictures in your mind that kind of agree with or copy things out there like a photograph. Rather, gaining knowledge is not like photographing things. Gaining knowledge is trying one thing out and then something else, and seeing, this one is successful and this one is not successful. It's very, very dynamic. By the way, that's kind of characteristic of 20th century philosophy and theology. People always prefer dynamic categories to static categories. So remember that if you're going to come up with a new idea, show how it's static. And so, no, don't show how it's static. Show how it's dynamic rather than static. James's philosophy of religion. He wrote a book, Varieties of Religious Experience, arguing that a finite God is all that we need to account for our religious experience. The other thing that he wrote that's very, by the way, he also wrote Defending Libertarian Free Will, but probably his most famous writing on philosophy of religion is called The Will to Believe. It's an article which is a reworking of Pascal's wager. And he says that Pascal's wager won't work for proving just anything, but sometimes we're faced with a question where we have to answer it immediately. Our choice is forced and our choice is momentous. And it's important that we come to a conclusion right now. We don't have time to go through experiments. We don't have time to go through a lengthy discussion, a lengthy calculation. We just have to make up our mind real quick in the midst of a crisis moment. And religion is like this, now is the acceptable day, now is the day of salvation. James says that Pascal was right, that in situations like that at least, we do have the right to take prudence into it, to reason according to what the odds are, what's likely to happen if I make this choice, what's likely to happen if I make that choice. And we have the right then to believe something without normal standards of evidence. And so Pascal's wager is an appropriate way of resolving the question of belief in God. Okay, that's American pragmatism. The third pragmatist, all these schools of thought have three representatives typically, which is kind of interesting. With pragmatism, it's Peirce, James, and Dewey. I say a lot about Dewey in my ethics book, talking about Dewey's ethics. And Dewey is also a very important figure in developing public education of the United States. And I think his influence there is very bad. But Dewey is interesting, very sharp thinker. He points out that our thinking is constantly in process. We never reach a point where we can just sit down and say, okay, now I know, now this is for sure, because the things we do, our projects are constantly changing, our goals are changing, our means are changing, our experiments are changing. You may start with one experiment and then decide that the way it's moving, it'd be better to do a different experiment. And so things are just constantly kind of in flux. And I think that sort of reduces pragmatism to a form of irrationality. But